Welcome to 10 Frames Per Second, a podcast about photojournalism with photojournalists for everyone. Hosted by J.M. Giordano and Elena Volkova.
Welcome back to 10 Frames Per Second. Our guest today is Pete Voelker. He's a documentary photographer who hails from outside of Washington, D.C. His work creates an abstract, dreamlike atmosphere out of landscape America. In his debut book, which we'll be talking about today, Here's Looking at You, it's a collection of photographs made while traveling across the country. We'll also be talking about a lot of his protest photos in his second book, which is System Change, Not Climate Change. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work in general?
Yeah, so I think my work is a broad spectrum for the most part. There's a commercial side, which is what I live off of, and then there's the documentary side, which is what I want to live off of, and all of it takes me kind of all over the country. And I think one thing definitely feeds into the other, but it is broad from the first book to the second book. I think the first informs the latter, but the work is very different.
So what kind of professional work do you do to kind of supplement your documentary work?
Professional work would be a lot of studio photography, which most people don't even know I do because it's not on my website or really anywhere. But so for the past week, I was shooting for Calvin Klein, working with Raf Simons and photographing his new collection of clothing. And, before that, Alexander Wang and Marc Jacobs. And so I do a lot of studio fashion work. And, that stuff allows me to take risks and go out on the road and kind of bury my head into other projects that I'm interested in. Because usually when I do that type of work, I kind of go for it first before I reach out to publishers or editors. And usually I kind of make the work and then I share it with people and say, hey, would you like to publish this? Are you interested? But for the most part, it's all self-motivated.
Nice. So I'm going to go off script for a second because I think this is a pretty fascinating facet of your work. No, really, because you're going from doing highly stylized fashion work to really, really intense. And I hate to use the word gritty because it's so cliche, but it's very grainy documentary work. I mean, how do you flip that switch when you go? I mean, there's absolutely no portraiture in any of the two books that we look at. I mean, there's brief, there's some brief ones in the Here's Looking at You, but nothing obviously is stylized. Do either of those styles cross over?
The commercial stuff, there's not much of my voice in it, to be honest. It's really using my, just the skill and education of photography and using it to make money. I mean, I do enjoy it. I don't want to say I absolutely hate it or anything. I enjoy working in a studio. It's challenging in a way. I do think they're very different, and I think the switch is hard sometimes. And, I think both can be emotionally draining in very different ways. Physically exhausting, but they're different. And, it's something, after 2 weeks of only being in the studio, I'm kind of itching to have other interaction. And I think that's a constant struggle that I deal with. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's something I'm still figuring out, and kind of trying to understand and figure out how to, keep both of them working together and building upon both of them.
Right. Elena, did you want to chime in?
Yes. One of the fascinating things that your website opens with portraiture, and I read it as an important element in your work. You work with people a lot. Seems like that's your line of work commercially, but also it looks like it's your interest as well. And I'm wondering, as a portrait photographer, there's always this so what element when we look at a human face or when we're about to press a shutter, the moment that sort of differentiate one split of a second from the other. And if you could talk a little bit about what do you search for in a human face? What is this so what moment that you look for when you photographing people, not necessarily for your commercial work, but for your portraits?
That's tough.
Yeah, that's a heavy question.
So I'm often told, I've been doing a lot of studio portraits for my personal work, both building my portfolio, to share with people, but also just kind of try to find my own voice with studio photography outside of the commercial side of it. So there is a renewed interest in that. I feel like a lot of my portraits end up looking sad. People always tell me, "Oh, I look so sad. It's a great photo, but I look sad." And I'm not sure why that is a reoccurring trend, but I think I am drawn to emotion in photos. Obviously, like a lot of people are. And I don't know, it's like, so I don't shoot film as much as I once did. I'm shooting more digital. So even when I'm in the studio making portraits, I will try lots of different things and, really try to experiment. So I don't know if there's a particular thing I'm going for always, but I would say I wait, I might take 40 portraits. Oftentimes it's the first one I took or it's like the last one that I end up going with. And I don't know what that really says, but I think that the goal is really to try to capture some real raw emotion or personality, even though, that a portrait, an image is, such a split second, and it's hard to get too much information in a studio in a portrait, but I guess that's always the goal.
Yeah, I mean, it also, Elena, I think, because I find a lot of the same issues where people think, well, I look sad, but I think we're going through a period now in human history where we're putting up these fake fronts, right? So we have like this, what I call like the cancer of the selfie, and like everybody has to be happy all the time. Like your food has to be perfect all the time. And if you show like a shred of emotion, it's like, well, I don't look like that, because you're not seeing yourself like that anymore. You're seeing yourself as this like fake human, right? Who's always smiling. Like people ask me, why don't you want me to smile in these photos? Like when I do documentary work for the paper, right? So I mean, do you think that carries over, Pete?
Yes, 100%. I think that's a big part of it. I think people, especially when I hear people say, "Oh, I look like it's a nice, like the lighting's nice, the composition's great, but I look kind of sad." I think it's because a lot of people aren't used to seeing themselves other than how they portray themselves on social media and how they want themselves to be seen. And I think that is a big part of it, because I often think they're beautiful and really intriguing photos, and they come back at me with, "Oh, well, I don't look very happy." So I think that is a big part of that issue.
Culturally, we as people want to believe that we have the right, we can reserve the right to look our best in images. And our best means smiling and happy, and that's how we that's the facade that I found as an immigrant in this country. Like nobody smiles in Ukraine, right? You walk on the street.
That covers most of Eastern Europe.
Right? People are not going to smile to you unless they have a good reason. But there's this this smile is a facade. It's an impression that you're doing fine, right? You're doing well, and then even if you're not doing well, financially, psychologically, many different factors, you still want to kind of show that facade of doing well. I find culturally that's who we are
Do you find it differently in your documentary work, Peter? Like, do you find people on the street more apt to be less constrained or less perfect as you would in your professional work?
So I'll give you an example. When I was traveling the Keystone Pipeline back in 2015, the proposed route, I was meeting with people on both sides of the argument, for it, against it. And there was this one family that I met with, and they basically were fighting the easement of their land for the pipeline. And when I went to take a family portrait, the wife, the daughter, the son all smile as as they're used to for a photo, and their father, the kind of guy who's been taking the charge of their fight against the pipeline, he was like, "Guys, like we shouldn't smile in this photo. We don't know who's going to see it. This is a serious issue." Like, so it's very deliberate. So I have photos of like 3 of them smiling, 1 not smiling, and then the next frame, all 4 of them aren't smiling anymore. And I always think about that moment and about the delivery and, of people. I think there's a lot more deliberate emotion on the street in protests often. Mm-hmm. I think people are aware of, that their image is being captured. I don't know. I do think people are aware of it, even though they want, in the same way that they want to depict the smiles and the happiness and the prosperity
Mm-hmm.
in the protests and the demonstrations. I think people do want to depict the passion, the desire, the anger, the sadness. I think a lot of it is still very deliberate, and I think people are aware, and and that might be for the same exact reasons as far as social media and just being hyper aware of your appearance.
Right. So, Elena, did you want to follow up, because I wanted to segue into the books.
Yep, do it.
Yeah. So we've got I bought both of your amazing books. And the first one, the Here's Looking at You, the travel book. I'm assuming that was first.
Yeah.
Peter, is that right? Okay. And then the second one is the System Change, Not Climate Change. And there's a huge leap between the styles in those series. How can you tell us a little bit about your thought process on that? How did you go from the travel cross country photos to the really grim and gritty protest photos?
So, Here's Looking at You is a pretty long project. Some of the earliest images are while I was still studying undergrad at MICA in Baltimore, all the way up until I think there's images as late as 2014 or 15 in the book. And it wasn't released until May of 2015. And for me, that book was really a culmination of years of kind of exploring my voice in photography and my vision, and definitely spans the years of my education in photography, and really just the formative years of just becoming a functioning adult.
Mm-hmm.
So that book it's very heavy for me. It means a lot to me because it's very introspective of my journey, just as a photographer and where I want to go, whether that shows or not. It's just always been my baby, that project, and something I've always wanted to put out. And it's kind of was as I was coming into my own more as a professional and getting more jobs and meeting editors. It was kind of my first, debut, my first delivery of images, basically. Mm-hmm. That's the way I saw it. And the difference, so that was taken, I traveled all 48 states, across the country probably 7 or 8 times. Sometimes it was a 2-week trip, sometimes it was a 6-week trip, sometimes it was by myself with friends. A couple of times I was assisting another photographer. So, all those experiences were very important in leading up to system change, not climate change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, just from seeing America and seeing, what we represent, who I am as an American, that was kind of a lot of the interest in doing those early travels. And I think, while that work is very different, I think it directly informs why I became so interested in protests and the fight for change and the fight for equality and the fight for social justice, across the board. So, the style, I don't know.
I don't want to cut you off. This is a really good line. This one, just letting you go. But Elena, did you want to?
I have a follow-up question about Here's Looking at You. I looked at that book and it's inspiring because I feel like it's kind of a reminder to everybody who's looking at this book that anybody with a camera could produce sort of like a diary in images. And I'm wondering, is this an ongoing project for you? Are you still shooting for this body of work, or you feel like you're done and you're ready to move on?
I would say I am, and that's why that book is so big. There's over 190 photos in that book, and I still struggle with, oh, should I have made a smaller edit? Should I have made a bigger edit? But then I look at new photos, I'm like, oh, that photo should probably be in that book or next to this image, and now I want to move this image over here. So yeah, I think it's something that I could return to, and I think I do still take photos for that project. But will I make a new edit? I'm not sure. Or will I actually revisit it? Maybe.
I don't, and this is like armchair criticism looking at, I mean, having both for several months now, and I've looked at them. They're beautiful books, by the way. I just wanted to put that, and that's non-flattery, dude. Like, they're really, really nice. And they're in my top tier signed collection on my bookshelf. But it's interesting how I think the country's also changed since the time you've taken these. I mean, these photos. I don't think you can go back to the here's looking at you photos. I think now you're completely involved in these social movements, and that kind of idealism of driving cross countries is not there anymore. Am I far off on that?
No, I think you're right. I think, I've had the urge to do another trip because it's something I obviously enjoy, but if I were to do the trip, I think it would be very different. And I think my approach, especially after focusing on protest work and demonstrations for the past few years, I think my approach would inherently be very different. I think you're right. It wouldn't be quite the same as here's looking at you. I think my perspective has shifted in the sense of, I don't know, empathy or humanity, empathy for humanity and people, and the differences between me and others. I think while the here's looking at you might have been a little bit more abstract in some ways and very straightforward as far as like the landscapes and subject matter goes, I think now I'd probably be looking a little bit more deeper for I don't know, more tangible issues, I guess, or of some sort.
No, that's great. It's
a little off the topic. So, in your opinion, I agree with Joe. It's a really interesting leap, and I could definitely see how the Here's Looking at You project might have informed your interest in photojournalism and documenting uprisings. I'm wondering, is there a photographer who, in your opinion, does it very well? And I mean, merging the images of landscapes in a political context.
So,
whoa!
I'm sorry.
No, I think there are, and it's like I don't want to be too obvious, but I would say Wolfgang Tillmans is really killing it in merging these two. This idea of fine art photography, as well as he's had a real strong commitment to activism in the past 2 or 3 years within his work and with his exhibitions. He'll have a big mural print of a scrotum on a desk, and then the mural print right next to it is from a BLM march in Baltimore or in London or wherever he happens to be. And, I think he has been putting these very different types of work together in an extremely successful way, in an engaging way, where he has protest photography next to still life and portraiture hanging up at the Gagosian, and I think that's awesome. I think that's really beautiful because whether people are engaging in protests and engaging in demonstrations of some sort, or if they're just whether they have acknowledged it or not, I think he's successful in a way of getting this sort of content in front of people who maybe wouldn't be looking at it and are more interested in fine art. And I don't know, I like the juxtaposition. So he's a big influence for me, for sure.
That's cool. And do you think because Audrey, our producer, was telling me that you studied under Ryan McGinley, who is a very famous modern photographer known for his using film, a lot of lively landscapes, things like that. Do you feel that you've made a clean break from your mentor like that, like moved on from doing that style of work, which I mean, I think like Tillmans and like Jürgen Teller to an extent, McGinley and unfortunately Terry Richardson have had a huge effect on modern photographic style. You know, I kind of see that. I kind of see the Ryan McGinley little bit of influence in Here's Looking, but when I look at the larger the system change book, I mean that's a complete break. I mean, it's a complete break. You know, that's almost really going back to like a more Robert Frankian type documentary, which I think is great. I think that's an amazing leap that you made. So do you think that that's kind of behind you, that kind of style? Is that?
Yeah, I think it is. You know, I think my experience with Ryan was amazing and practical in so many ways. You know, like my first 4 years in New York City, I was working with him. So as far as like photo industry wise, I learned a lot with him, and it definitely impacted my style because he was someone I looked up to, and I really loved his work and was helping him make his work. But yeah, the style, you know, I think with Here's Looking at You, I wanted to be, it's like for me, I don't think I necessarily tried to shoot any differently. I just think I put myself in better situations or more engaging situations and challenged myself to use my vision in a different way. So I don't think I'm necessarily looking at things differently. I'm just in a completely different atmosphere. Yeah, I think moving away from the more dreamlike, you know, imagery of Ryan and into the more literal imagery of Robert Frank is you know, a compliment. I thank you for that. But it's yeah, I think it's exactly kind of what I wanted to do as far as my career goes, and you know, trying to find my voice and iron it out.
That's cool.
You know, both, you know, Robert Frank, The Americans, you know, it's obviously one of the best photo books ever made.
Right.
And it had a huge influence on my first trip across the country.
Can we talk about your Insignificant Impact project?
Yeah.
As sort of a, maybe then we'll merge into the Uprising book, the
System Change.
Yes, System Change. But I feel like in Insignificant Impact, in a way you merge in the two interests, one in landscape and portraiture with activism.
Activism.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what is the impact that you're talking about? Why is it insignificant? And how does photography help you solve these issues?
So in early 2015, I was really interested in the pipeline because it was becoming such a politicized piece of infrastructure. You know, this project that is somewhat, you know, I want to say somewhat regular. We have pipelines all over the country, but it quickly became a flashpoint of policy, domestic policy, as far as energy and jobs and the economy goes. And I was really interested in just how, like, really how much I was hearing about it, and how, you know, President Obama was not approving the permit, and you know, there's just something about it that I was drawn to, and for me, it was an excuse to go on a road trip in a way. You know, it's like, how can, you know, bridging these interests of traveling, seeing the American landscape, and protests, because I started reading about farmers building, you know, clean energy barns on their land, like completely demarcating the path of the pipeline. So this one family built a barn that was wind and solar powered exactly on the path of the pipeline, saying, okay, if you want to build this pipeline, you have to tear down this beautiful free energy symbol. And the people who built that was this family and a bunch of other activists and farmers from northern Nebraska. And I thought that was really beautiful form of protest. And I read about that, and I was like, oh, I'd like to go see this. And then, you know, you meet one person, and they're like, okay, well, check out this family 100 miles this way. They've done this to fight the protests. And these people, they were against it, but then they signed the easement because someone in their family got sick and they needed the money, but they're actually really, so it's all very interesting, and one thing led to another. But the insignificant impact is actually a quote from a family also in northern Nebraska called the Hipkes, and it was, her name is escaping me at the moment, but she was going on about the pipeline and how someone from TransCanada, who's the owner of the pipeline, said it would be an insignificant impact for people in northern Nebraska. And she said, we are the insignificant impact. The pipeline right now is routed to go directly over their well, which is the only source of fresh water that they had. And it cost them $300,000 to even tap that well. They were just, and that well provided water for them, their crops, and their livestock. So for them, it was their complete livelihood, both, personally and professionally, that was under threat with this pipeline. So the title actually comes from a quote from an interview with her about the pipeline. But I do think that project was a successful bridging of my different interests in photo as far as landscape and portraiture goes, as well as the protest. And I've been striving to find the next project that will be similar. But
it shouldn't be hard.
Yeah, well, because one of the photographs I noticed is in system, but in black and white with the dog and the Native Americans in the back, the dwellings in the back. I hate the word teepees. I don't never use that. In the back. So how did that picture come into the system book, and why did you choose to put that one in black and white? An aside, I'm just curious.
So I would say the black and white decision with system change, that climate change, was as much might be disheartening to some, but was mostly financial decision. I wanted to disseminate some information, put out this small run of this book before the election. So I printed these in October of 2016. And I did an exhibition in London. I showed 40 prints, and I brought some of these books and sold them there. And then I sold some at the New York Art Book Fair in New York, and that was it. It was a really small edition.
Yes, I invested in you. Yes.
And, so the black and white, it's like in my portfolio, my prints that are printed out right now, they're color. And on my website, I have color versions on there now. But unfortunately, that was more just a pragmatic decision. I have the ability to make that decision, I guess, have them being digital files and whatnot. I just thought it was more important to get the information out there and maybe inspire people to be more active or pay attention. So that was more just like a critical decision,
Yeah, because the reason I asked that question was, and the reason I noticed it was because I had a series called Gray and Black and White, where my Tumblr was black and white photos from the uprising, but some of those weren't in color, and I chose to put them in black and white. So I was just curious and we're kind of along the same lines. That's why I asked. I was just curious to know what your line of thinking was when you convert from color over to black and white to make it a completely different photo. But yeah.
I have a follow-up question. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Or did we want Pete to answer your question?
No. I just put it out there. I just want to explain why that photo caught my eye in the book and in color on the website, because I've done the same thing. So I was just wondering what his thought process was on that. That's all.
But this was your intention, because black and white there's a certain degree of symbolism in black and white images that color just doesn't hold.
Yeah,
and that's how we view this book.
Yeah. I think that black and white is the language of photojournalism, personally. Yeah. So
why?
Because I think with I'm not being interviewed here.
Yeah, just answer the question.
No. So I just think that like you said, Peter, like black and white calls your attention to the immediacy of the subject, where you're not distracted by colors you're not distracted by other things. I mean, it really really makes you focus on the subject at hand and not the things around it. Like, and then when I do lectures, I tell students, they ask, like, how do you choose to convert black and white, or why do you choose to shoot in black and white versus color? If color is not part of the subject, then I go for I think black and white is important. I don't think that it's, if I take a photo of a woman or a person with, say, a red hat against a blue building and it catches my eye, well, that's not going to look great in black and white. That's a person against a building. But the intent was color versus, in photojournalism, the intent is the subject, like the hard subject, the newsworthiness of it. I think black and white communicates that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't, so I get it was a purely financial decision in the moment, but only felt safe doing it for that reason, because, I didn't think by dropping the color I was harming my images by any way, and I didn't think I was losing any information, maybe some literal information being the color, but the message was still there, and maybe even more direct in black and white for sure.
We were just looking at your book before the interview and discussing the size, the white space around the images, and the choice of blank pages on the opposite sides. Can you talk a little bit about your opinion on photojournalism, daily news, and the place the images have in the book that are in a way withdrawn from the context and from the stories?
Yeah. So the format of that book really came from the desire to have people interact with it. So the system change book is wire bound for two reasons. One, you can fold it back, have an image displayed, and put it on a shelf and, kind of present it. And I like that idea, but I also was encouraged. I printed it large. I think they're like A3 size or A4. Printed it large because I hope people would tear the images out and put them on their wall that way, kind of treat them as little posters or prints. I didn't want it to really be like a super precious thing. I wanted people to really interact with it and enjoy the images, and if they want to just focus on one, because they are different. And yeah, bringing them out of that news context and out of being published the day after the event or the week after the event, I think the images do hold a different weight, especially when you don't have all that background. But I was hoping that they all stood on their own feet for sure, and could be seen without that other context.
Yes. Speaking of text and the size of the photos, can you talk a little bit about use of text in the System Change series, where there's virtually no text in the new series? And here's looking at you, but you seem to have been drawn to text in the context of these protest photos. Can you go a little
or
bit
even
about
language? I'm curious about how the language that sort of is shown in the T-shirts and the signs, with the relationship with the imagery and the context.
So I think there's a lot to consume in demonstrations. Everyone's got a sign or a placard or, a T-shirt with something written on it. So, not everybody is willing to talk or have a conversation, but also you can't really portray a conversation. Even the ones who I do talk to and connect with, that's hard to share via photographs necessarily. Like the I can't talk. The more intricate parts of the conversation, it's hard to portray that. So I think I revert to using signs and, definitely focusing on these more literal pieces of text within the scene, because I think that helps, give, so I think that, like what we're just talking about, photos, being put out of the news side of it and into a book, and seen months, years later. I think by having that information with the signs and, those details, I think that helps give weight to the situation, and just that background information that allows me to not have to be like, oh, this was at this demonstration on this date for this reason. I think it helps those photos live more independently by focusing on those details, I guess.
So in your opinion, is that what unifies all people in your photographs, despite protesting for different reasons?
Yeah, I think really it's passion overall is what I'm like super drawn to, and I think is across the board, whether it's a rally for something that I believe in or not. I think it's always really beautiful, to see, it's like the romance of these people coming out, whether they're missing work or being paid by George Soros or whatever, I think there's undeniably always a passion that is just so interesting to me, this fight for change, this fight for equality is of course very important, but even the counter protesters, so, say for whatever cause, you have 1,000 people, you have 200 people there against them, but those people are just as important and just as amazing to photograph because they're just as passionate, just as upset. I don't know, there's something about it that is just undeniable, and I think that is across the board at all of these demonstrations. And I think some of the details of the signs and shirts, I really like seeing, a sign that you can see where they mapped out or erased something or like have written a few different things, and then they finally go over it with the marker. But if you look past the marker, sometimes you'll see the pencil or the pen outline of what they had been working on. I don't know. I think there's lots of different layers to it, and I think I'm always surprised and always energized and inspired by each demonstration I go to. It's what, it's like I'll go out thinking I'm going to be at a rally for 2 hours, turns into a march. I'm gone for 9 hours, walk 10 miles, and I'm like, get home at midnight and have my story filed by 2 a.m. because I'm just so amped up about it all. Feeding off of the passion of everybody else that had been around that whole day. Even if it's something I'm like morally opposed to, it's just it's always just a really interesting, beautiful thing.
Have you? That was my. I'm curious if you ever been present at a protest that you don't believe in the cause or you believe in the opposite cause, and discomfort that you experience as a photographer trying to stay objective.
Right, or should you believe in a cause?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's almost some of the. It's for me. I really enjoy those days and those stories just because it's a learning experience. It's challenging. You want to be objective. You want to hear what everybody has to say. I think earlier when I first started, I was much more vocal and would have more conversation and share my opinion, and maybe, too much, and maybe in like a not a constructive way. And then I think with more experience, I've learned not to be more open. I think I've always tried to be open, but I've learned, I don't know, I enjoy it. So yeah, I've covered lots of things I don't believe in. During the primary season, I went to a bunch of Donald Trump rallies in Iowa, which were very eye-opening. But spending 12 hours at a rally with all Trump supporters is also very beautiful in its own way. Not to talk in such absolute terms, but not that all I'm not trying to say Donald Trump supporters aren't beautiful or anything.
I will.
I'm just saying the passion really is what unites it all for me. But sorry, I think I
no. I mean,
that's great to hear because You know, a lot of times it's very difficult. It's very difficult to separate one's own agenda from one's work. And
Right.
How do you deal with, and this is because Pete and I both, I've been shooting Trump rallies all in the spring and summer, and we were kind of crossing each other. But Pete, I mean, how do you deal with just the hatred at these Trump rallies? I mean, you eloquently put, you know, how you see a lot of the Trump supporters. I came away with a completely different attitude towards these supporters. That, I mean, it just seemed like it was this undistilled hate, you know, just like, how did you deal? And being, I mean, we're both coastal photographers, right? So we're not immersed in any, at least I can't speak for, I'm not immersed in any of like the Iowan culture, the Fayetteville culture, any of this stuff. And I was shocked at what I saw. I mean, how do you deal with that emotionally as a human?
It's tough. It's really tough. I would say, you know, there's days I come home and, you know, or, you know, I'm on the road and it's just exhausting, you know, like mentally, physically, emotionally. I mean, I've seen that hate. I've been completely repulsed by it, but it comes from somewhere. And I think that's what is interesting and important, is that there, you know, a lot of it is misguided. A lot of it, or can be misguided. I don't know. I think, you know, I've been spit on. I've been called liberal media, this or that. You know, I've been punched. I've been kicked out of places. But, like, I don't really take too much of it to heart. You know, I'm like, yeah, that sucks. Someone spit on me just because, you know, I work for, you know, I happen to have a badge for like a liberal media company, you know, like that type of stuff is pretty disheartening and kind of like, what the hell is going on? But at the same time, it's just, I don't know, you just got to brush it off, I guess, and say, you know, I don't know, everybody gets excited, right? You know, I've been in moments where I've seen people arguing and I'll interject and just be like, guys, calm down. And then both people will get mad at me for, you know, interjecting, just like asking people to respect each other. So it's all, I don't know that anybody, you know, people on the far left and the far right, everybody gets excited. Everybody can be rash and rude and hateful, really. And I think that's kind of like the equalizing part for me, is like, and that's maybe where I started thinking it's really beautiful, is that like, everyone is doing it because they firmly believe in something, and I think that's great. You know, like whether it's a really shitty thing that might be wrong and marginalizes people, or if it's a belief that supports everybody, I don't know, there's something intriguing there. But yeah, I don't know. I just try to refrain from being too caught up in the hatred side, because I don't know, it's just tough. It's like, even the stuff that I really disagree with, I can't really separate myself or say someone is completely wrong. I don't know, everyone has just such a, you know, it's so easy to have a different perspective.
Right.
So
usually protests are saturated with photographers, and everybody has different opinions, and everybody kind of comes out with a set of photos that then make it into the news. What are your thoughts about it?
It can be crazy sometimes, but, you know, we're all there together. So I really try, you know, I sometimes shoot myself in the foot and give away leads, or I'm very open. I share a lot of my information, or what I'm up to, or what I'm interested in that day or that week or that event. So I'm very open, but I do think it can be a circus sometimes. You know, I know, Joe, you were in Cleveland, and that was like a pretty wild situation.
Yeah, that was. But see, the thing in Cleveland, it's really strange to me, Pete, because the thing in Cleveland, which is going to go into our next question, it had more of a circus atmosphere where I didn't get that hatred that I got in, like, you know, out in the hinterlands. Did you see what did you get that? Like, it was more of like, I mean, even they were happy conservatives, you know?
Yeah, so I think people went into Cleveland thinking there was going to be a very strong resistance, and there was going to be, I think, even the law enforcement, everyone was prepared for violence. I don't think anybody wanted violence on either side of the aisle, but everyone was prepared for it. Reporters, law enforcement,
Mother Nature, she was just like,
yeah,
so nice.
it was all perfectly. Everyone was ready for it, but there was none to be seen. Which I'm really thankful for, and I think that's good. But yeah, the people that were attending the convention, I was frankly, I mean, if we want to talk a little bit about the election season, it was interesting because I expected more of a resistance against Trump, but when I got there, I realized people were embracing him. They were there to be at a convention to celebrate their year, their primary process, and I think they did it. They did it in a great way. There was protest, but it was not that many Republicans protesting. There was a small handful here and there, but it was mostly,
Yeah, there seemed to be more, like in Philadelphia for the DNC, there seemed to be more
so that was
like liberal protesters protesting against Hillary than was like people that were protesting against Trump. But we're gonna wrap it real quick. But I do have one last question. So how do you think the presence of media affects the way these protests play out? Like I want to end it on the protest work that you've done.
So how does the media affect the protest?
Yeah, I mean, especially like in DC 2 weeks ago for the inauguration. I wonder if
it can very directly affect it. I think a lot of times protesters, especially like these Antifa guys in DC, the people from like Revolution Books, they do some of these more direct actions that are more incendiary and problematic in different ways. And I do think, I don't think the media makes them do this stuff, but I think they help instigate it in some instances when, you have 30, 20 photographers following a group, often very small groups of people, a minority within a bigger group, because their tendencies and their interests or tactics. I think, sometimes I don't know, if is it which one came first, the chicken or the egg? It's like sometimes that sort of situation, like real quick flashback to Cleveland, there was that day, everyone knew there was going to be a flag burning by the gate to the arena. And then all of a sudden everybody heard it was going to be back at the plaza, like the free speech zone. So then a mass of people rushed back over there. And I'm in the plaza reporting with a writer on something else, and a photographer grabs me by the collar and goes, they're burning the flag, we have to go over to the gate. And there's just tons of reporters sprinting in that direction.
Did you see the photo of all of? Well, I'm so thankful I didn't get a photo of that little burning trash can in DC 2 weeks ago. And there's that photo of like all these like photographers clustered around that tiny little flame. Did you see that?
So yeah,
I kept walking. I'm like, oh my god, I would have been in that photo if I had stopped. Right. But yeah. So we're gonna. I think we're gonna wrap it up. We have a couple rapid fire questions.
Cool.
We have 3 questions, and we hope that you will answer them in just a phrase.
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire, right? Okay. Photography is a primary tool for what?
Sharing information.
When I look at an image, I look for
empathy.
A photographer is responsible for
perspective.
Nice,
great.
Good. That's good and quick. So, are you? We usually end the podcast, Peter, with some like book recommendations or an Instagram account that you're following or you're reading. We don't do much with gear on this show because I think there's a ton of shows out there that are all about the gear. So yeah, is there anything cool that you're, photo books you're looking at, books you're reading, or Instagram people you're following?
There's 2 Instagram accounts that I've been enjoying over the past, 6 months or so. Both in my opinion, legendary photographers that have been around for a long time but new to social media, kind of sharing their archives and whatnot. But one being Jill Friedman, who's an amazing New York street photographer. Has been around, pretty heavily for a few decades now. Pretty amazing work, black and white street stuff. And her Instagram is great. I think I think it's only been a few months that she's been on, maybe.
Yeah, I didn't think she was on it. I'm very familiar with her work. I didn't think she was on Instagram.
Yeah, she just got on, and it's great. And I think it's really cool because, it helped her with a whole new resurgence. She's like been publishing in magazines again. I don't know. I think it opened up to a whole new audience, her work. And I think her work's really important. So that's great. And even I mentioned to Audrey had like a poll recently about favorite photographers in Baltimore, and I chimed in and said Michael Northrup, who also just got an Instagram account recently, and he's the first photographer I actually ever interned with while I was studying in Baltimore, and I think his Instagram is really sick, and I think he's a very underappreciated, under-acknowledged photographer who has a really amazing archive. If you ever get the chance, check it out.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Michael's. He has a book that he saw published a few years ago, I think. Maybe like 10 years now, I think.
Yeah, Jason Fulford, J&L Books, has made 2 books for him, I think.
Yeah, his stuff is really great. I've been looking at the work of like Paulo Pellegrin, the photojournalist. Have you ever seen any of his work?
I have, but I'm gonna definitely dig into it right when we finish this.
Yeah, I just been on ordering his book binge, and both of which I thought of him looking at your systems book. Elena, what are you checking out? Anything?
I'm the academic grind.
Okay, well that's cool. No, that's cool. All right, well listen, Peter, thanks for being on the podcast, man. You were a great guest. It was really good talking to you.
I hope I didn't ramble on too much for you guys.
No, this is kind of exactly what we're trying to do is create a dialogue within the photojournalism community, and I think it went really well. All right, cool. We'll let you go, man. Thanks a lot, Peter. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, man. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. The big news in the photo world this week is the announcement of the World Press Photos 2017. And it wouldn't be a World Press Photo without the controversy. Last year, it was digital manipulation. This year, as Stuart Franklin, who was on the committee, he wrote in the Guardian op-ed piece about the controversy of the main photo, which shows a gunman who had just shot the Russian ambassador in Turkey. He thinks that it shouldn't have been photo of the year. What do you think? We've looked over this.
Yes, we did. We discussed it a little bit. I understand why. It could be. This message could be taken different ways. So we're looking at an image of a man pointing his finger in the air with a gun, with the dead body of the ambassador on the floor. And I guess the concern is that this photo might be empowering to terrorists. So it's not about compassion. It's not about human story. It is a shot that was definitely caught by a master photographer. But the context.
But is he a master for just being there? I mean, it doesn't seem. I mean, the photo outside of the obvious incident. I mean, it's this is part of a series, right? So he was just blowing off rounds, really quickly. So what makes him a master photographer in your opinion? I mean,
well, let's back off, Joe. I meant that we assume that the photographer who shot this image is a photojournalist, and his job was to document the event.
He's an AP photojournalist. Yeah.
I don't see. I mean, do we need to see an obvious danger that photographer was putting him or herself into in order to judge the image? Is this something that is a prerequisite of, you're I guess you're questioning whether this was shot by somebody who was standing there with their cell phone, right? Versus a photographer whose job it is to cover current events. But I don't think that matters really. I think what matters is what do we as a sort of collective, society culture gain from experiencing this image, and what is the multiplicity of interpretations depending on who we are, how we read this image, right? So if you were a terrorist, right, you will be empowered by this.
I mean, it almost looks to me like, first of all, I don't agree with the empowerment of the terrorists. I mean, then we shouldn't cover any bombing or any shooting because it's going to give them publicity either way, right?
I mean, isn't that the argument in this article?
Right. I mean, well, he's saying that we shouldn't because it shouldn't be photo of the year because it empowers these people. I'm saying I'm kind of ambivalent either way. I think it's a great news photo. I think it's fine for photos. I think other ones, I'm not on the jury, obviously. There's this really heartbreaking photo of a rhino who had just had his horns hacked off, which to me is a more important photo of the year because this is really happening in what we're doing to the planet, as opposed to an ambassador for Russia being gunned down at a gallery. But what's really striking, and I'm surprised he didn't bring this up, is it really looks like a performance art piece. I mean, this looks like my editor pointed out at the City Paper where I work, that it almost looks like a Robert Longo painting from his Men in Suits series, right? I mean, look how formal that looks, in a white room, in a white gallery, stands out. So
definitely, and the gun kind of blends in with the pants. If you squint, that doesn't really give you the full context.
Right. And I think that, that this guy didn't take a shot at the photographer because he was there for the media coverage. I mean, where are these people without media coverage, right? I read a piece in high school in Time magazine about this cruise ship that had been taken over by Italian terrorists. And this is where they pushed the man in the wheelchair off the deck. But they were so far out to sea, they couldn't get coverage. So it was like they got no coverage. So it was kind of a failed thing. But we're gonna wrap up our news. And if you're interested in looking at the 2017 World Press photos, check out our website, which will be at the end of the podcast. And that was photographer Pete Voelker. You can follow on Instagram at PeteVoelker. That's Pete Voelker on Instagram, and links to his work and books are on our website. This has been 10 Frames Per Second, produced by Audrey Gaywood and John DeVecca, recorded at WLOY Studios at Loyola College, Maryland.